Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're tackling a massive, practically invisible puzzle that's happening all around us, literally every single second. We're going to figure out how computers actually find each other across the globe. We live in a world with millions upon millions of connected devices, and honestly, the way they organize themselves to communicate is just an absolute architectural marvel.
So, right off the bat, how does a message find one single device out of millions? When you send data across the internet, you aren't just chucking it out into the void, right? You're targeting a very specific piece of hardware located somewhere on this planet. To understand how that data actually reaches its destination without getting hopelessly lost in a sea of technology, we've got to understand the fundamental rules of network design.
To make sense of all this, we've got a quick four-part agenda today. First up, the name and address analogy. Second, physical versus logical addresses. Third, the broadcast traffic problem. And finally, hierarchical network design. Let's dive straight into section 1, the name and address analogy, a tale of two identifiers. And honestly, it's always best to start with a concept we already deal with in our everyday lives. Think about how you identify yourself out there in the physical world. You've got a name and you've got an address. Now your name, that usually doesn't change. It's your permanent identity. On the flip side, your address relates directly to where you live at any given moment. It's entirely location-based. If you pack up all your stuff and move to a new city, your name comes with you, completely unchanged, but your address updates to reflect your new location. You absolutely need both of these things to function in society. Well, this perfectly mirrors how computer hardware operates. In the digital world, a host device has a MAC address, which acts exactly like your unchanging name. It's a fixed identity stamped right on the device. But that device also has an IP address, which acts just like your changeable street address. It updates based on whatever network the device is currently visiting. Okay, moving right along to section 2, physical versus logical addresses. Let's look at the actual tech behind this metaphor. First up, we have the physical address, better known as the MAC address. And the reason we call it physical is because it is literally physically assigned to the host's network interface card, or the NIC. This physical address is absolute. It stays exactly the same regardless of where you place that host on the network. Whether you're connected at your house, a local coffee shop, or an office halfway across the world, that MAC address does not budge. It is the permanent, individual identity of that specific host. In stark contrast to that, we have the logical address, which is the IP address. Now, we call it logical because it isn't hard-coded into the hardware. Instead, it's assigned logically by a network administrator. And the absolute key factor here is that this assignment is based entirely on where the host is currently sitting on the local network. It's fluid. It constantly adapts to your environment. If we break that IP address down, it actually contains two distinct parts. One is the network portion. This part is going to be identical for all hosts connected to the same local network, kind of like the city and street name in our physical address analogy. Then the second part is the host portion. Within that same local network, this host portion is totally unique to each device, exactly like your specific house number on that street. But here is the major takeaway from all of this. You absolutely must have both. Both the physical MAC address and the logical IP address are completely required for a computer to communicate on a hierarchical network. Think back to our mail analogy for a second. If you want to send a letter to a friend, yeah, you need their name on the envelope, but you obviously need their address too. Without both, the mail carrier is just guessing. Computers operate on that exact same logic. All right, on to section 3, the broadcast traffic problem, the threat of scale. Now that we know how these devices identify themselves, it's time to meet the villain of our story. I want you to just imagine for a second how incredibly difficult communication would be if the only way to send a message to someone was to use their first and last name. Imagine a world with no street addresses, no cities, no towns, no country boundaries whatsoever. Trying to deliver a message to one specific person across the entire globe using only their permanent name would be, well, impossible. You literally have to go around asking every single person on Earth if they were the right recipient. Now, apply that impossible scenario to the internet. We are talking about millions and millions of hosts. And remember, a MAC address tells you the identity of a host, but it does not tell you where on the network that host is actually located. So if all the millions and millions of hosts on the internet were identified only by their unique MAC addresses, trying to locate just one of them would be an absolute nightmare. And you know what? That nightmare gets even worse when we look at how underlying networks actually talk. Ethernet technology generates a massive amount of what we call broadcast traffic just to get hosts to communicate. So, what exactly is a broadcast? Well, it's a message sent to all hosts within a single network. Basically, it's a device shouting at the top of its lungs to everyone in the room, just hoping the intended recipient hears it and shouts back.
Now, as you can probably guess, this blind shouting isn't free. Broadcasts heavily consume bandwidth. When everyone in the room is shouting, things get incredibly noisy, incredibly fast. All of this broadcast traffic severely slows down network performance. It creates this highly inefficient environment where your real, important data just struggles to get through all the noise.
Which leads us to a pretty terrifying thought experiment. What would happen if the millions of hosts attached to the internet were all grouped into one massive, flat Ethernet network, and every single one of them was using broadcasts to find each other? It would be absolute chaos. The entire system would immediately grind to a halt under the weight of billions of devices constantly screaming their permanent names into the void. Because of this, large Ethernet networks with tons of hosts are just inherently inefficient. So how do we fix it? That brings us to Section 4, Hierarchical Network Design. Saving the internet. Enter the architectural hero that stops all the chaos. Since large, flat networks fail so spectacularly, the solution is beautifully straightforward. You just divide those larger networks into smaller, bite-sized, more manageable pieces. We basically have to organize the chaos. And hands down, one of the most effective ways to slice up these larger networks is by implementing a hierarchical design model. Let's look at how this builds into a structured system. We separate the network into functional layers. We start right at the foundation with the access layer, which provides the direct connectivity to your devices on an Ethernet LAN. Right above that, we build out the distribution layer. And finally, the core layer sits right at the center. By structuring the network this way, we contain all those noisy broadcasts. We use logical IP addresses to route traffic highly efficiently through the core and distribution layers, and we only drop down into the local access layer when we've pinpointed exactly where that specific device's MAC address is currently hanging out. It really is an elegant system, and it's quite literally what keeps the digital world spinning. So, I want to leave you with this final thought. The very device you are using to watch this explainer right now has a physical, fixed MAC address, its permanent name. But where in the global network's massive hierarchy is your logical IP address placing you at this exact second? You're actively participating in this massive design right now. Thanks so much for joining me, and keep asking great questions.